Hey, welcome to the last weekend of 3 services until we go to our summer schedule. So yeah, I'm excited for that. I don't have to preach 3 times. But for you, don't show up next week at 10 o'clock. You will be 30 minutes too late or an hour too early, depending on what you want. You can. We'll put you to work. We'll find somewhere for you to serve, make some coffee, But hey, next week, either 9:30 or 11. Don't show up at 10. Don't do that. But we're excited to give our volunteers a break for the summer, and we want to encourage you to join Summer Serve if you are able. But we are in week 3 of our series, Throne of My Heart. We're talking about these various gods or idols that sit on the throne of our heart, that supersede God's role in our lives. And Kyle Idleman puts it this way. Kyle Idleman, he's a guy who wrote Gods at War, and it's one of the books that we have kind of based this sermon series on. But he says that this is really important because there are gods battling for the throne of our hearts, and the winner will determine our destiny. That's so good. See, the Bible talks so much about idolatry because it affects our heart, and it may not seem relevant to us, but behind every sin that you are struggling with, behind every discouragement that you're dealing with, behind the lack of passion or purpose that you're living with, there is a false god that is winning the throne of your heart. And until you evict him and place the one true God on the throne of your heart, you will not see victory. Now, the idols or fake gods that we deal with today are not made from stone or wood like they were in the Old Testament. But many of them are just as physical and tangible as them. The god of money could be that wallet that's in your pocket right now. It could be that purse that's sitting beside you. It could be that ginormous truck that you bought that's sitting in your garage at home. Actually, probably not in your garage because it won't fit in your garage, but in front of your garage at home. It could be the god of pleasure is as tangible as the food in your refrigerator, the TV on the wall, the phone with an app or website in your hand. But some of the most potent gods are not tangible like that. Most of them are intangible, and those are the ones that we are talking about today, the gods of power or control. And really what I'm going to focus on is control, because I think behind power is the idea of control. We want power so we can control things. So let me just ask you, how many of you are in your life, you like having control in some area? I think it's probably true of all of us. How many of you, like in my house growing up, he who controls the remote controls the night? Yeah. Now, you kids now, you don't understand when you have a TV in every single room and you can watch whatever you want whenever you want. But growing up in my house, we had one TV, and whoever had the remote controlled the night. And as the youngest of 5, I was never in control. And in fact, I remember when I was very young, I was the remote, where I was sent to go turn a dial on the knob on the TV to change the station. You have no idea what I'm talking about, do you? That's all right. It's really interesting to me how almost everybody likes to have control in some areas of their lives, but not others. Right? Some of you are really controlling at work. Like everything's got to be just like this and got to be done in this perfect exact way. But when you get home, it's like, whatever, do whatever. And then the person sitting next to you is like the exact opposite at work. They're like, I'll get it done eventually. Maybe someday. And then at home, they get there and like, man, we got to get these kids going. We got this timeline and schedule. We got to go. We're controlling in some areas of our life and not others. Some of you are very controlling about your finances. I got to know where every single penny goes, and it's got to be exact, and I got to know down to the penny. But when it comes to your children, you just kind of let them run off and do their thing and not really trying to influence them at all. You're controlling in some areas and not others. In our family, Lindy could care less about what we do with our money. Like, she doesn't care. Like, when I say, hey, I want to invest this money in this one place, she's like, okay. I married a preacher. I always expected to be poor, so if we lose it, whatever, She just trusts God and trusts me that we'll make the right decision. She doesn't care. But when it comes to our family schedule, when it comes to like a family trip oh man, she is doing hours of research. She's making bookings. She's planning this and that. And it's down to the minute. She's got it scheduled, planned out. Me, family trip, I'll go wherever you tell me to go. That's cool, whatever. But when we get in the car, who's in the driver's seat? This guy. Like, I need to be control in the car because I cannot control those in the cars around me, and so I have to be watching and vigilant and keep making sure that nobody destroys it. In fact, if we go on a 15-hour car drive, I'm probably driving the whole way. Now, go on a 24-hour drive, I'll probably drive most of it, but through those big cities, I'm in control. I'm driving. And if we look at our lives, we will find that typically, most of us, we like control in some areas and not others. And we typically try to get power in two broad categories of things. We try to control people, or we try to control circumstances. We try to control people. There's some people in your life, like, there's a couple things about them. Man, if I could just change it. You know that saying, God loves people and he has a plan for their life? Well, you think you're God and you love people and you have a plan for their life. And if I could fix those few things, you're going to be perfect, right? You want to help them see what you see, and you want them to do what you want them to do, and so you manipulate. You bribe, you coerce, you guilt, you use passive-aggressive behavior, might even threaten. Without even knowing it, we'll so often manipulate the behavior of others because we know what's right, don't we? We want to be in control. We also try to control circumstances, right? We gotta look just right. Our houses have to be perfect. We have to have the schedule that's just right. And the kids, when they leave, they're exact replication of us, and they're perfect. We want to control their future and their schedules. We want to lay everything out exactly how it's supposed to be. And why do we want to be in control? Because we really believe that we know what's best and what's the best things to do, and it's our right to enforce that. What's really interesting is the more that we try to control something, the more we fear losing control. And the more that we fear losing control, the more that we try to control it. And we enter this spiral, this cycle of control and fear and anxiety and control and anger, and because we can't control it. And I know some of you are sitting right here, man, I hope, so-and-so is listening. But it's so hard to look in the mirror and see this in ourselves. It's so hard because we really, truly do believe that we know what's best. So it's not controlling. It's not that. Place the need for control on the throne of our hearts. And so what I want to do today is I want to give you an example of a couple that put the God of control first in their life. And I want you to see the disastrous consequences that it causes for generations. Now, this story is actually the precursor to the one that Adam talked about last week. So if you were here, we were in Genesis. You can go ahead and open up to Genesis 16. But it's about Abram and Sarai. You probably know them better as Abraham and Sarah. Now, that's what God changes their name to later. But Abram and Sarai have a tremendous problem. They love to control what's going on around them. You can read one story even before the one we're going to talk about now, where they're going to Egypt, and Abram sees that his wife is beautiful and that Pharaoh is probably going to want her. And so he's, let's control this situation. Let's manipulate it. Let's say that you're my sister. Man, the chaos that it caused in that situation. But just a little bit later, we see the story that we're in, and God comes to him and he says, I'm going to bless you. I'm going to make you the father of many nations. You're going to have so many children, you can't count them. It'll be more than the stars in the sky or the sand on the seashore. Like, what an incredible promise. Like, this couple has been wanting children forever. They've had none. They're older. And so this promise is incredible to them. But when God didn't immediately do what they wanted him to do, what did they do? They did what so many of us do, and they tried to manipulate the situation. They tried to take control of their own destiny, and they stepped over God's promise. We see this in Genesis 16. It says, now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children. but she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. So she said to Abram, "The Lord has kept me from having children. Go, sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her." She's saying, God has made this promise, but he hasn't fulfilled it yet, and so I'm going to step over the promise, and I'm going to fulfill it my own way because I'm in control, and I know what to do. Text goes on, Abram agreed to what Sarai said, and so Abram had been living in Canaan for 10 years. Sarai, his wife, took her Egyptian slave Hagar and gave her to her husband to be his wife. He slept with Hagar, and she conceived. See, when they forced their control on the situation, it is impossible to describe the amount of chaos that it caused for literally millennia. In fact, if you continue reading this story, Hagar gives birth to a son named Ishmael, and sometimes later, God does bless Abram and Sarah with Isaac. And there is so much tension and strife between Hagar and Sarai and Ishmael and Isaac that literally for generations and millennia there has been strife. You may know the Palestinian people that have descended from Ishmael and the Israelites who descended from Isaac. Literally 4,000 years of conflict that we still see today because a couple stepped over God's promise and couldn't wait. They needed control. Now, chances are you're probably sitting there and saying, "No, this is no problem for me. I'm never going to sleep with my handmaid. I don't even have a handmaid. How am I going to do that?" Here's what you're going to do, though. Maybe you're a single girl. The clock's ticking. Man, I want to get married. There's no single guys here. So what am I going to do? I'm going to manipulate the situation. Now, this guy, he's okay. He's not a Christian. And so, I can change him. It'll be okay. And you settle, you compromise for something that's less than God's best because you want control. Or maybe it's financially. You're a strong believer and you know God tells you to tithe, but you rationalize it and you compromise and you say, well, maybe when we're out of debt, then we'll do it. Or maybe just never. It's just one of those silly Old Testament things. You compromise. Or maybe you just want something so bad and you can't afford it. So what do? You control the situation and you borrow money that you can't pay back to buy this thing that brings temporary pleasure. And you're left empty. But you're gonna control the situation. You're gonna make it happen one way or the other. And so here's the big application question that I want you to ask yourself. And I want you to ask it beyond just today. I want you to ask it over and over again. And then I want you to write it down. If you're taking notes, type it up. If you're writing notes, write it down. But I want you to write, what are you trying to control? What are you trying to control? Is it people? Your children? Maybe your adult grown children who are not raising your grandchildren the way that you wish they were? Maybe it's your coworkers. Maybe it's your image, your schedule, your timeline of how you think life is supposed to go. Go ahead, write it down, type it out. What am I trying to control? You can sit back and say, I'm not doing this stupid exercise. You just look at me and this is stupid. I'm not gonna write anything. It's okay, go ahead. Just prove that you're in control and prove that I'm right. What are you trying to control? And when you identify that in your life, I want to give you 3 questions that you can ask over and over again. You can learn to lay down the God of control and trust God. The first question you're going to ask is it worth my concern? Is it worth my concern? This is just so simple. One time when Jesus was at Mary and Martha's house, Martha was just trying to control something that really didn't matter that much at all. She's running around the house and she's cleaning and she's organizing, she's cooking, and she gets so frustrated because Mary is not doing anything, and she shouts out to Jesus, "Jesus, make Mary help me." And Jesus says this to her, Luke 10. He says, "Martha, Martha," Lord answered, "you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed. Indeed, only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken from her." Jesus is saying that there's only one thing that's worth worrying about, and it's your relationship with him. It's who's on the throne of your heart. Otherwise, you need to ask yourself, is it worth my concern? And so many of us are trying to control things that mean nothing. They're meaningless. Let me just ask you, does it really matter if someone folds the towels the wrong way? I just released somebody in this room. You are welcome. Does it matter if your son goes to school and his hair isn't combed perfectly? Is he going to not make it into UGA someday because of that? Is he going to go to prison or hell because he didn't have his hair perfect? Does it really matter, fellas, this one's for me, does it really matter if your wife just leaves trash in your car? You know, the door handle's right there. My wife calls it the door trash. There is no such thing as door trash. But does it really matter? It doesn't. Yeah, I hear some of you saying yes. It doesn't. It doesn't matter. Get over yourself. Loosen up. Is it my concern, for example, my own life? I've always wanted to have a nice yard. I don't. I've always wanted it. But it's almost embarrassing. I can't tell you how many times Miss Bunny or the Osborns have driven by my house and I'm doing something in my yard. But the problem is I have 3 beautiful children who love playing in that yard. And then specifically, I've got one who loves playing golf. And I swear he hits more ground than he does ball sometimes. Like my beautiful yard with all these holes and divots. Like I want a beautiful yard, right? And finally it dawned on me, like it truly, deeply dawned on me that I need to embrace these dead spots with all of my heart. Embrace it, fall in love with it, and thank God for it, because one day I won't have these holes and divots in my yard. And I also won't have 3 beautiful children running around in it. No, those holes and the divots, they mean something. Is it really worth my concern to have a gray yard when I've got 3 beautiful kids who love playing in it? Is it worth getting upset about? Is it worth my concern? Ask yourself that over and over again. The second question you want to ask yourself, is it mine to control? Is it mine to control? And the answer sometimes is yes. Sometimes, yes, it is yours to control. And there are other times where the answer is no. But here's the thing, hear me clearly. Surrendering control is not the same thing as abdicating responsibility. It's not the same thing. You should still be responsible when you can. For example, if you're messed up financially, should you sit back and do nothing? No. You should cut back on your spending. You can do something about it. You can take Financial Peace University. You can learn how to budget, and you can learn how to sell cars that you don't need and cut up your credit cards. There's something that you can do. If your marriage is struggling, is there something you can do about it? Yes, absolutely. You can go to counseling with your wife. You can start having a devotional together. You can pray with one another. You can go on a date. There's something you can do about it. If you're a guy and you haven't been on a date in 5 years, do you just sit there and trust it to God? Well, yes, but you can also do something about it, okay? You can take a shower, and you can leave your house and go to where there are women, and you can stop playing your Xbox, and you can surround yourself with people that you can ask out. Yes, there's something you can do about it. But there are some things that you have no control over. And so if you ask yourself, is it my control? Is it mine? There's some things you're going to have to say no. And these things are not for me to control. James 4, he shows us very clearly that there are some things that we need to lay down. He says this to us control freaks. Now listen, you who say, today, tomorrow, we'll go do this or that. We'll spend a year here and there, carry on business, and make money. He says, why? Why? You don't even know what will happen tomorrow, let alone a year from now. What is your life? You are a mist that appears a little while and then vanishes. Is it worth my concern? Is it mine to control? If you're taking notes, number 3 is it for God alone? Is it for God alone? Is it worth my concern? Is it my control? Is it for God alone? Ask those questions over and over and over again. Hey, is it worth my concern? Embrace the dead spot. Is it mine to control? If yes, I'm going to do something about it. Or is it God's alone? Paul told the Philippians something very powerful in Philippians 4. He says, do not be anxious about anything. When you're anxious about something, you're trying to control something that is not yours to control. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, what? In every situation, by prayer and petition, and with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. You give it to God, and when you do that, what does he say will happen? He says that the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. See, when you give it to God, the peace of God will guard your hearts and minds. In other words, when you try to control something that you can't control, you're anxious. You're filled with fear and anger. But when you give it to God, you have peace. So many of us, we've allowed the God of control to have the throne of our heart, and we're stressed, and we're worried, and we're fearful, and we're angry. Surrender it to God. Give you peace. Here's some application questions. I want you to say yes or no. Answer this for me. Can you change your spouse? No, I got a yes. Oh. No, you can't. You cannot change your spouse. We think we can. We think you can, but you can't. You can love your spouse. You can pray for your spouse. You can have healthy conversations with your spouse, and you can love them. But what if you can't change your spouse? You love them. You pray for them. And you trust them to God. You stop trying to control them. Can you heal your loved one that is sick? No. As much as we want to, we cannot do that. So what do? You pray for them. Yeah. You encourage them. You give them good medical advice. And ultimately, what do? You trust them to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds. Can you control your future or the future of your children? As much as we want. Man, I'm going to have a career by here, I'm going to get married by here, I'm going to have a baby here, and it's just all planned out. Can you control that? No. I've learned that myself. But what can you do? You can pray. You can make plans. You can make wise decisions for the future. But in the end, you give control to God and the future to God. The answer is you give it to God. Let's go back to Abraham one more time. What did he want more than anything else in the world? A son. What did God give him? A son. What did God require of him? His son. This was Adam's story last week. If you were not here, Abraham has been given his child, and he loves his child. It's the promise that he's been given. And God says, take him and sacrifice him. And so Abraham, this guy who wants to control everything, and up to this point has proven that he will take control at every moment, has finally learned his lesson. And he goes to the mountain, and he's climbing, and him and Isaac are going up, and Isaac says, where is the sacrifice? And Abraham says, God will provide. They get to the top, and Abraham ties him up, and he's ready. And God says, no, stop. I believe that you love me with all your heart. You have shown and proven yourself. Don't lay a hand on him. And Abraham looks over, and in the bushes there is a ram. And he takes and sacrifices the ram instead. And Abraham, in Genesis 22:14, says, he called that place, the Lord will provide. The Lord will provide. When Abraham finally surrenders control of that what he wanted most, he saw a miraculous provision of God. When he stopped trying to control everything, but instead started exalting God with what he valued the most, the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, guarded his heart. And because of that, the Lord provided. I'm here to tell some of you in this room that you're trying to control something that you cannot control. You're trying to control something that's not yours to control. And when you try to control what's not yours to control, it will control you. When you try to control what's not yours to control, you will be filled with anxiety, fear, and anger. But here's the thing. Here's our sermon in a sentence. When you allow God to have the throne of your heart, You will know him as Jehovah Jireh. The Lord will provide. And he will provide everything that you need, because you are not God, and you should not take that spot on the throne of your heart. But when we lay down everything that we think we want, we need, we desire, we must have, when we give up that control, and I trust God with these things, the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Jesus Christ. Is it mine to control? Is it worth my concern? Or is it God's alone? God, we come before you now, and we just want to control everything. We want it all for ourselves, and we want to exert our will over the people and the situations around us. And so, God, we just apologize right now. God, open our eyes to the things that are beyond our control and are for you alone. Help us open our grasp on these things and allow you to have them, so that your peace that transcends all understanding will dwell in us and overcome all the anxiety, all the fear, all the anger that we have. For it's all yours. For what are we? We are just a breath. We don't know what will happen tomorrow. So we give it to you. It's in your name we pray. Amen. If you are like me, that sermon stepped all over your toes. That was mostly written to me. And some of you just need to give up control in this one area. You've been holding tight for too long, and it's been controlling you, and you are just anxious inside, and it's tearing you up. And when you try to control it, you just become angrier and angrier when nothing happens. I just want to encourage you, stop stepping over God's promise and just let him have it. If you need to come to the altar, they're open. Just come and give it to God. We have elders on either side if you need someone to pray with you. Come and lay down your need, the God, the idol of control. And stand as we continue.